Evening, morning, and afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. I hope you are having a wonderful week so far. We're here with the latest episode of the Inside Crypto Show, interviews and discussion with regular people just like yourselves. Today, we are joined by Rigg Eckelberry, the CEO of Originclear. Originclear has developed and licensed a decentralized system, crypto people decentralized, that treats industrial and agricultural wastewater worldwide with very little energy use and no chemicals. It also allows industrial users to treat their water right where they use it, putting control back in the hands of the consumers. That is a mouthful, guys. I know you're not used to that, but we're going to talk about that just now. And let me tell you, it'll be worth the wait. We have to do the usual disclaimer. Anything said by either Riggs or myself does not constitute financial advice. Please do your own research. Our opinions are our own and not to be connected with our respective organizations. Because it's just Riggs today, we get to dive into his background and how you got into crypto and Originclear as well. Riggs, thank you very much for making time in the morning for the show. Tell us about yourself.
Korean, it's interesting that you bring up crypto first because we know that we're moving away from a currency-based system to more of a commodity-based system. And so even though crypto can be considered a currency, it's really an asset class. But I'll get to that. And it's even better when it's underpinned by real assets such as monetized water, for example. My path to this position is long and tortuous. But basically, I was an international kid raised in Canada, the Caribbean, and in France and Belgium. And so I think early on, and remember this, I'm relatively old, so this was not long after the war. And Europe was still very well aware of what they'd just been through. And then I spent the next 10 years after that working in a nonprofit and also learning a trade, an ocean-going trade. As I mentioned before the show, I was a merchant mariner, both in the Atlantic and the South Pacific. And so I've seen a lot of the world. I finally came to the realization that the world was on the verge of a major technological breakthrough, and I wanted to be part of that. And so in the 80s, I foolishly launched a business in New York City where I went through pure hell trying to meet payroll for 12 people every 2 weeks in the computer industry to computerize businesses for the first time. And we were very good, but it really wasn't my cup of tea. What I was really looking for was, how do we transform human relationships using computing? And my dream came true, of course, with the internet in the early 90s. I got to play in the .com, had a wonderful time. And eventually, after the year 2000, we were able to do some really good stuff because frankly, the 90s was a lot of fluff. In the early 2000s, a lot of good stuff was built. And one day I felt I could become a CEO. Now, you should tell your audience, do not ever wish to be CEO. It's a masochistic thing. As Elon Musk I was just watching his show that he did with that big summit, and he says, being a CEO is a lot of chores, and it's very true. But I still wanted it. And so I got with a fund that liked me. And they said, well, Riggs, we're not going to tech. We're going to green. Green is the thing. This was 2006, 2007. And we think algae is the next fuel. Cool. And I happened to have a brother who had developed some technology that could be used to feed CO2 to the algae who live off CO2. And we launched a company immediately into the public space. And it was called Origin Oil at the time. And we were doing algae for biofuel, and I had the best time. It went on from 2007 all the way to 2014. But unfortunately, the oil industry figured out fracking, and the price of crude dropped below $50, and algae for biofuels became a science experiment. And public companies don't work as science experiments. We like to actually get somewhere. So we found a use for our technology of harvesting algae from water to harvest sewage from water. And that's how we ended up in the water industry. And that's when I really ran into a brick wall, because water, first of all, people think water is important. They don't care about sewage. Please don't tell me. I want to know about clean water. With that sewage thing, that's that concrete system down by the river that somebody's running. And it's out of sight, out of mind, but it's actually very important. But I've learned as a marketer, you don't try to sell people on something they're not interested in. So with that began a search for what was really going to make a difference in the water industry. Because one of the very first things I learned about the water industry is that we have a problem in the world. 80% of the water that's used by humans in industry is never treated. It's dumped in lakes, rivers, groundwater, and oceans, and only 20% is clean. Now, That 20% is primarily in the developed world. Clearly, we treat most of our water here in America, treat most of our water in Europe. I dare say in Taiwan, there's good water treatment. But then you have places like Bangladesh where there's almost no infrastructure. And that's where most of the people are. So you have a problem with lots of people tipping the balance towards very poor water quality. And eventually that dirty water comes around and makes the clean water dirty. And so when people say clean water is a human right and you shouldn't be privatizing, like, okay, but you need clean water. Water is a human right, but it shouldn't kill you. And that's where you need to start thinking about the fact that water is a loop, and what comes down, what gets dumped eventually ends up in your faucet. The problem really is that the state of water in the world is very poor. And there's all kinds of stats. 6,000 children die each day in the world from water-related diseases, et cetera. But the water industry itself is very resistant to change. Everything's fine. We do it a certain way. We have these big central municipal plants that do the job, and these are not the droids you're looking for. I'm not interested in doing that, playing that very static game. And so we tried to start making a lot of change happen. Early on, it was technology. We had this breakthrough technology, as I was saying. But the problem in the water industry, again, is technology adoption is very slow. It takes 12 to 15 years for any technology to be adopted in the water industry. And we didn't have that kind of time. So we realized technology per se is not the solution. It's an enabler, but it doesn't break through. We then started to acquire companies, which we've been doing well, and we've been building properties. And then in 2018, I had a crypto experience, which I'll discuss later. And finally, we came to the COVID era when we realized we really had to do something to change the entire basis on which water treatment is done. And that led to this current thing called water on demand, which is water as a managed service. And of course, we can dive deeper. But that kind of takes us to the present.
Hey, wow, there's so much. As you're talking, I'm writing notes, and I'm already in like a page of notes. I'm like, oh. And I mean, just at the introduction as well, I want to talk about the crypto stuff. I want to dig more into water on demand, and as you said, like water as a service, as changing the basis of the way water exists in the world. But before all of that, I feel like your experiences moving around the world created you to have this sort of altruistic perspective. And is that sort of the lens at which you run your business through?
I got the save the world bug early on when I worked in the nonprofit space and got paid almost nothing, but I had a great time. And eventually we grow up, but I think we keep that, right? And I'd probably be in fine shape with the 9 to 5 and to have my 401k and this. I'd probably be going slowly crazy. Once you're bitten by the bug, I don't think you can go back. You have to think every day, what am I doing for the way things are? And the world needs help. There's no question about it. And we're in a huge transition period. And deglobalization, as we're seeing it happen, is actually part of that same decentralization story. It's actually one and the same. It's the whole big trend of falling back on own resources versus depending on centralized resources. And that includes the deglobalization phenomenon. So very interested in how I can help fashion the next world, which will be self-sustaining. It'll be virtuous from a green point of view, but it will also take care of the people everywhere and not just leave huge gaps where you have millions and billions of people very poor and underserved.
That's really an important point. Coming from South Africa and growing up pre-apartheid and post-apartheid, and even now, after Mandela's passed so many years later, there are still lots of water issues in South Africa. There are even water issues here in Taiwan, where are considered very advanced. But we'll get into that. I know our listeners tune in for crypto, so we're going to start off with the crypto stuff first. And you mentioned 2018. So what happened in 2018?
Okay, so just to backtrack a couple of years, in 2016, I read a Lux Research study. It was a webinar on decentralization. And it basically said, look, all the centralized systems are failing. In America alone, we are falling at the time $50 billion a year behind on needed infrastructure upgrades. And by the way, the Biden administration, they did a huge multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure bill, and it was only $55 billion for water. So that did nothing, right? So the federal government funding less and less, cities not being helped, also standards being raised, so more and more demands and more industrialization. And it said, look, the trend is clear, it's moving to the edge. And I had an epiphany. I'm like, this is it, this is what's happening. And I started talking about it, and I got absolutely nowhere. No, decentralization of water. What the heck you talk? I flush my toilet, it goes away. What's my problem? Talk to the industries whose waste is not being taken by the city because it can't. And unfortunately, that is not what industry goes through is often just not visible to the general public. But it led to a realization in the fall of 2017 that crypto could be a very important component in this decentralization. And I've always been looking for a lever to accomplish change in the water industry. And I went, you know what? This could be a very interesting way to go. And I started to theorize a coin at the time called Water Chain. And it was basically a way to monetize water. And I spoke, for example, at the D10E conference that year, which is a decentralization conference, and spoke at Puerto Rico at the Restart Week that year and so forth. And two things happened. The first thing, of course, we hit crypto winter, which made it very hard to continue, but that wouldn't have stopped us. The more important thing was that we realized there is no single price of water. In oil, you have Brent crude and you have West Texas crude. These are prices that are known and everything is based on that. There's no such barometer in water. So you can't build a market if you don't have a price. And that's when we realized, look, this isn't working. And we pulled back and started working on some of the fundamentals. The first thing piece was, if you're going to have decentralized systems, then you have to have the delivery systems for it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That was phase one of crypto. And now we're going into phase two.
Very interesting. And Watercoin, fascinating and pulling back. And I love what you said, you can't build a market if there's no price. And that is definitely a pearl of wisdom. Pulling back and talking about things at the moment, right? Because you are someone who has global experience and a lot of years of experience. A lot of people are in disarray, not just with the traditional stock market, but with the crypto market as well. And I wanted to get your take, and especially I think our users would love to get your experience. Why do you think the market is coming down so often and coming down so heavily? Is it, I love that you mentioned the phrase deglobalization. Is it a factor of that? And what do you think the reason is behind the way things are existing economically and globally at the moment?
We saw in the 80s and 90s the development of just-in-time systems. But when you think about it, just-in-time systems are incredibly fragile. The slightest thing throws it off and you don't have the inventory backlog. Now, businesses loved it because they were able to cut all kinds of costs, and the ease with which they could dial up a factory in China and get things shipped over very easily made them complacent. But then we've had a series of shocks. Of course, COVID was an enormous shock. It showed that arbitrarily entire economies could be locked down. I'm not going to say what's right or wrong about that. That's a different discussion. But clearly, things could come to a grinding halt, and including the current lockdowns in China right now, which are very difficult. So you have those issues, and you also have conflict where the breadbasket of the world, I think the number 3 source of wheat in the world is Ukraine, the Ukraine breadbasket, shall we say, being cut off. And these are things that are going to deeply affect people all over the world. And then you have Russia being a number 1 supplier of things like phosphates, which are essential to fertilizer. And without phosphates, you can't make rice. And so now you have a rice problem. So the entirety of Asia is affected. And of course, there's a problem with chickens, and it just keeps going on and on. And so we have a domino effect that I don't think the world's leaders are really in control of, because they're being buffeted by events, doing this, oh my gosh. And meanwhile, what's happening is we're getting a realignment. And very good thinker, I strongly recommend to your audience, is Peter Zeihan, who is, if you look up his most recent, he did an end of the world energy seminar to a naval academy in America here. And he laid out the issue, speaking to a military audience, which was very interesting, and saying, okay, what's going to be the results of conflict, et cetera. And things aren't going to work out well for China. Here's why. But also the rest of the world has all kinds of knock-on effects. Interestingly enough, he felt that North America, not just the US, but thinking of North America as Mexico, US, Canada, is going to do fairly well. Why? It has its own wheat, it has its own resources, it has its own oil. It has shopped out a lot of its technology manufacturing to China, but that can come back. It's going to be hard, but it can come back. So in a bunch of hillside forts that the world becomes, North America does pretty well. South America does all right. Europe's in trouble because of decisions they've made. And North Asia has a problem. South Asia, he commented on all of that, and I won't get into what he said. He's just an excellent thinker and lots of data. So what I'm saying is we're now looking at self-sufficiency is the new slogan. And we've seen this in our water business. We operate 2 production facilities, one out of Texas and one in Virginia. And what we've seen is an influx of demand for self-sufficient water treatment in housing developments, RV campgrounds, trailer parks, travel stops, the kind of hotels, human communities that need to make sure that their humans are doing okay. And we realized that this is a trend that is only going to amplify. COVID accelerated. I myself, with my wife, we were thinking of moving to Florida from LA for a long time. And then COVID hit and was like, okay, we're out of here. We're done. So COVID was an accelerator for a lot of people that made them decide to go for a more, I didn't know my neighbors in LA, and it's ridiculous. The sustainability of living in LA is very low. You rely on everything being just right. And if you can't drive, you're screwed. Here in Florida, I'm part of a community, and a lot of people have moved in that direction. Okay, enough of this. I need to have a sustainable life. And it's even driving people to become expatriates more and more. But the overall trend is self-sufficiency. And I think that's going to be a growing trend. And it reinforces this idea of self-sufficient water, which brings us to some of the enabling ventures that we've put in place. And I would say that it's related to the decentralization thing because, again, you're not going to rely on a municipality. You may not even get clean water. You may have to have your own well. These are all considerations that people are thinking about now.
We originally had to structure this, but just because you brought it up, I'm very interested in the idea of the whole decentralization and water stuff. I know, across the political spectrum, you tend to have more center right, you say privatization, more center left. It's like governments do everything. How do you convince people who are like, okay, I'm worried about privatizing my water because water, as you mentioned, is right? How do you convince those people to say, okay, you can trust us. You're a company, you have to make money. We're going to make money, but we're also going to look after you at the same time.
We're not buying up any water rights. People get confused. They think that we're dealing with the sources of water. That's not our business at all. Right now, sources of water are in trouble. Look at the American West with Lake Powell being now having shut off its outflow because it's gone too low. And now Lake Mead is going to be in trouble, which means all of Las Vegas is going to be in trouble. And it's this whole domino effect. It's not being handled very well. What we deal with is the result of all that. Okay, let's assume that water is not being handled well. What do we do about it? Let's enable you. Let's empower you to be water independent. And so what does that mean? As a business and as a community, being water independence means a few important decisions and then implementing them. And I think that far from we're not quote unquote privatizing water, we're privatizing survival. It's a different thing. We've been relying on central facilities for survival for a long time. And that dependency is dangerous. Now, I'm not looking at the left-right spectrum here. I'm saying there's a place for centralized systems always. Take a look at, for example, when I was growing up, I'm much older than you, so I remember mainframes and literally those telex machines with the ticker tape that would go into the mainframe, 30 CPS, 30 baud was the speed of transmission into those systems. And that everything, you had to wait, you had to book time on the mainframe, right? So the mainframe was king and the user, was part of the great unwashed people who needed to use it. The PC revolution flipped that. Now computers are there to serve us. And last night I wasn't using my computer. It stayed on. It was waiting for me. It was at my service. And you think it's less efficient in one way, but it's more efficient because what's more important, the computer's time or my time? Now, mainframes haven't gone away. The cloud is huge, right? It just changed. It changed from being a computing central to being more of a repository, a storage environment. And it's a large, there's nothing wrong with the size of the mainframe industry, but what it's done is it's shifted the computing load to the edge so you don't have these terrible backlogs and so forth. So I think there's the same thing happening in water, where more and more of the water processing is going to the edge. which means that the central facilities don't have to do quite as much. We're moving away from that 50s mentality of everything big, concrete, central, giant, huge things, which we were in love with. It actually goes back to the 20s and 30s, right? Hoover Dam and so forth. The big, and look at India, a $90 billion hydrological program up in the headwaters, but zero attention to sewage in the big cities. Picking up the thread, in other words, decentralization actually empowers humans because it puts important things in our control, and we're able to use resources on a communal basis that are not life or death. If for some reason the city can't take my processed water that I've now processed, fine, I'll dump it in the ground. Who cares? If they can't supply me with clean water, I'll get it from a well. But if they're there and they can do the job, I'll use them. And I think that's the best way to go. Let's take a look at California. They keep talking about doing a high-speed train. It will never happen. Why? They already have freeways. So the Google self-driving car is going to be the high-speed bullet train of the future because they built the darn freeways. And so that's an enabler. Why? Well, I get in my car and it takes me where I go, and I don't have to worry about getting off and on a train and finding a taxi and this and that. I just go. So it's a different philosophy, and I think frankly, it's a good trend, and it's definitely reflected in the crypto trend. That kind of self-help thing. You could say money is a human right. No, money is not a human right. You have a right to earn money. But wait a minute, the money is being devalued as excessive reliance, again, on central banking in this case.
I like how you brought that back. Would you say what you're trying to do at Originclear, the idea of decentralized water, is it very analogous to the idea of more and more people in the places where you can get it with solar and like Tesla power walls, where they control the electricity, and if they generate more, they get to sell it back to the electricity company. So you are no longer relying on the centralized electricity provider. You are creating your own electricity from the sun, and you're selling it back to the centralized provider. And is what Originclear is maybe the long-term goal is for when it comes to consumers, that you are responsible for your own water.
The energy analogy is very good because we're moving away from a big central grid, which is very vulnerable. I was interviewed for a publication recently about cyber attacks on water. I'm like, look, if water treatment goes local, you don't have a cyber attack. That was the original idea for the internet until they decided it, as originally designed, it was hardened against nuclear war. Today, it's not. You can take out the internet like that. But back then, the way DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Program, designed it, each node was completely independent. And that's a good strategy to have. That's the strategy that the world is following with this quote unquote deglobalization. And that is also a lesson we need to learn about crypto. For example, the over-reliance on exchanges is very dangerous, in my opinion. We need to become, accustomed to decentralized finance in crypto as well. We talk the DeFi talk in crypto, and then we go centralized anyway. That's crazy, isn't it?
Very much so. But it's still like in the crypto sense, there's still a lot to do to get people away from centralized exchanges. It's for some like different levels of uses for anything, and a lot of people like centralized exchanges are there. It's easy. I don't need to worry about it. And then going to these decentralized finance areas, oh my God, MetaMask, wallets, keeping control of my own keys. Oh my God, if it's lost, then you get those stories of people who have 12 Bitcoin somewhere on a hard drive and they threw it away. And I don't think a lot of people are ready for that kind of personal responsibility just yet.
Unfortunately, it's true. And this is the same thing with this decentralized trend in water. It's not happening for everybody. So what we're about is, look, Originclear, we are a clean water innovation hub. By that, I mean that we develop these very useful properties. And now we have 5 that are at various stages of development. And we've currently launched one, which is this Water on Demand initiative. And that Water on Demand initiative is very important because in early 2020, when the world stopped, we realized that we had to do something to enable financial transactions in water to happen for these new decentralized users who couldn't just do a municipal bond offering as utilities do. They just had to take out a loan. And if you're a brewery and you need a water system, you want to invest in brewery systems, not $1 million to treat the water. That's not your priority. And so we say, well, that's fine. Just sign here. You'll get your machine and it's fully managed. Don't worry about it. That's a boon to the decentralized user because they never intended to get into the water treatment business. None of us plan to take care of our own water. So when it comes along, because we have to, then it makes sense to make it frictionless by creating an investment vehicle. And so water on demand, we call it water like an oil, meaning that investors can invest in a water system, and it's actually a basket of water systems, very much like what is known as master limited partnerships in the oil industry, where they have a basket of properties so that one oil well can fail, it doesn't matter. So essentially it's a commodities basket, and it generates royalties. We're doing the same thing. Now, for the very first time, ordinary investors can come in and invest in water systems and receive a residual. And the users at the other end don't have to come up with the capital, and they pay by performance, which is very ethical in my opinion. So that is what we're working on to enable all this. Now, the next step is the crypto step, because now we're paying out residuals, and we're paying it out for a long time. These are systems that are going to last at least 25 years, more likely 50 years. And so it's generational residuals. And some people are not interested in waiting 50 years for their money. So what do? It's like that NFL player who put his contract into a coin, and then people were able to buy pieces of the contract at a discount, and he got his money now, and they wagered that he would actually not get hurt. This is the insurance companies do this, for example, where you're able to get net present value out of a future income stream. And so what we decided to do was to wrap these dividends in an NFT or asset coin. People say, is it an NFT? Is it an asset coin? And that's TBD. To me, the structure is less important than the function. But let's assume it's an NFT for now. And we call it $H2O, $H2O. We've already trademarked it. And we've got it well worked out to where now there's a stream of revenue from these paper gallon systems. That means every gallon of water is paid for in this system. Now we have that magical price that we were looking for. And then we wrap it in an NFT, a royalty generating NFT. And then you, Creon, who invested, $20,000 in the system, you get your little residuals, 25% of net profits forever. And you go, okay, it built into the NFT is a smart contract. So the entire revenue stream, lifetime revenue stream from this investment is built into the NFT. I transfer it to Riggs, and now Riggs has that and pays for it. Now you have this very low friction marketplace for water. Now, for the very first time, people are able to trade water assets. And that is what we're working on currently. We've had to separate it from water on demand because in the United States, the SEC is very picky about companies that play with crypto. And so we're doing it as its own thing. But it's imminent. It's being worked on. There's also a community element we call Clear Aqua, where the community alerts about water problems and then bubbles up to the top. Proposals get submitted, and they go over to the H2O side for capital. So that is the vision there. The key part, again, is number one, it's actually based on, if you imagine the future app, you will see the amount of gallons being treated by the system you've invested in and how much money is throwing off. And you will also have a known price for that water. So for the very first time, I have a water risk in Northern California. I can offset it with options on Singapore water. And now we have a global marketplace. And that is the vision. We think it's high time that we had a water coin. And again, I believe the future in crypto is asset-based, because putting aside Bitcoin, which is its own special case, I believe that altcoins need to be more than a vapor. They need to be based on something real.
Wow. Amazing. I'm a bit speechless as well. You wrapped everything in the sort of crypto bubble as well, which is perfect. I don't actually, it's like this podcast could just be you talking about water and crypto and wrapping everything together, still being very thematic with this show as well, which is nice. Actually, I have a lot of questions. One of the things when I looked at the Originclear site, and I think this might be a trend, and I just wanted to check with you, is that when sometimes people look at like really cool ideas, like what you're doing with Originclear, okay, it's not possible for me to invest, even if I have $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, because you are taking investments from banks or VCs or someone like that. But if I'm not mistaken, a regular person can put in capital into Originclear.
Correct. The breakthrough with water on demand is that we've enabled the regular investor to invest in water, something that could not be done before. You could only buy municipal bonds or EFTs or shares in Veolia. You couldn't actually invest in productive water assets directly. This is the breakthrough. Now, currently, right now, you need to be either non-US or a US accredited investor, one of the 1%, to invest. Now, we don't care how much you invest, but you have to prove, if you're in the US, you have to show that you're making a certain amount of money and so forth. But this summer, we do intend to roll out an unaccredited offering so that people can come in and invest at a much lower level and still get residuals on these systems. So we want to democratize it. I have operated in the public space now for 14 years through the graces of accredited investors. And I think they're wonderful people. So, it's so much better than trying to work. Every time I try to work with Wall Street, they've been very predatory. Like, we'll help you, we'll help you. No, they won't. They're only there to help themselves. Come on. It works if you have scale, but if you don't have scale, you work with these angels because they're patient. If you treat them right, they'll treat you right. Anybody who's stuck with us has done well, even though you can look at our stock graph and we've had a history of losses because we're developing. But accredited investors have done well because we've made sure that they are protected from loss. And I also believe that we've now built enough value in the company that we are now turning into a series of crowdfunded properties that the common stock itself is now, I believe, going to start to be worth something. I think a regular investor today, even though he can't yet go into the water asset play, he or she can certainly invest in OCLN. I love cheap stocks because they go from 2 cents to 4 cents and you just doubled your money. It's fantastic. Whereas Tesla goes from 1,200 to 1,300. That's nothing. There's no change at all. And yet that's a lot of money. It's something that I believe everyone should have in their portfolio, which is a nice little cheap stock. And because it's got that upside, of course, it's got risk, but by now, I think we've shown that we're very good at being a kind of a incubator for these interesting water plays that are, I believe, are going to be real bricks in creating this new self-sufficient, independent water independence world that we're moving to.
And I totally agree. And I think anyone, if they've been alive like the last 20 years or so, they would have seen emergent data about water crises in a particular country, but throughout the world. My parents are dual Irish and South African. And in a place like Ireland, where it's like rains all the time, Ireland has a water crisis. Irish people always joke if the government ever started charging for water, they'd be all right. But at some point in the future, environmentalist friends of mine in Ireland are like, yeah, the government has to start charging for water because they have a problem with treated water and untreated water and giving clean water to people. And that's the trend it's going to expand to pretty much everywhere in the world. And I think what you're doing is fantastic. Because
I think that we should be able to survive what happens to government, because you can't just say, well, government will always be fine. China's living through tremendous disruptions that are highly arbitrary. And the poor people in these highly locked down cities are like going, wait a minute. I heard that the ideogram that's surfacing most in Chinese social media is the ideogram for run.
Oh, yes.
It's terrible. With that in mind, maybe a highly centralized system with no fallbacks. Who would have known that those preppers were right? The people who were like accumulating stores. Oh my gosh, they were right. So a balance is good, but be sure to ensure that you're good. And that goes for crypto. I think that crypto has a fantastic future. I'm not worried at all about the current pricing. The issue with Bitcoin, of course, is that a lot of people invest in it as if it were a stock. And so when the stock market goes down, it goes down. But that does not mean that it's not an amazing parallel economy. And I'm really looking forward to rolling out a really solid water coin that enables this kind of liquidity, I'm going to use the word, in water marketplaces.
I mean, talking about like a blockchain and Ethereum, and when you do roll out a water coin, not if, are you going to make your own blockchain? Are you going to build it on top of something else? Is there any inkling towards that at the moment?
That's why I like NFTs, because you don't have to create a whole infrastructure. You don't have to like program down to the metal. You can, sit on top of the NFT standards and basically just code a product. I lean towards that. I would say that it's an 80% NFT proposition. There's some talk of creating an asset coin from scratch. Don't see the utility of it, but then again, it might have some benefits in terms of its long-term future. NFTs are very convenient today. is it something that'll be as good in 5 years, 10 years? That's for better than, I'm not a crypto designer. So that's the kind of debate we're having internally, but I would say we lean towards NFT.
Okay. Do you own any NFTs at the moment, or have you bought any just to experience the space?
No, frankly, here's what I've learned. Every time I try to do anything else but my own job, it's like, oh God, kill me now. I just stock trading and I even got involved. There was that thing where you could invest in the wiggles of the cryptos. They go up and down the algo.
Yes.
I didn't have time to even start doing it.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, oh, yeah, with it.
Nice. Within your organization, you must have somebody then, like people who you rely on, tell you this is what is happening in crypto, that sort of stuff, will keep you up to date.
Oh no, we have a great development center that is actually based mostly in Argentina. There's some very good developers down there. The company is America based, but they uses these amazing Argentinian developers. We have our crypto advisor he's a program manager at Red Hat, his full-time job, and he helps us. We have enough resources. Now, here's what's interesting. I was into .com, and many of my .com friends are today in crypto. So I have all the resources I need from personal relationships. And I have no doubt project management, crypto development, all the cryptonomics stuff, I've got the resources needed. And really the question right now is focus. We think of ourselves, as I say, as a venture hub for clean water innovation. And the key is don't do everything all at once. Focus. Do one thing. The water on demand is the underlying engine for a lot of what we're building on top of it, such as the crypto, such as these modular water systems that are part of that scheme. So we're really focusing on building that ground floor and ensuring frictionless financing of water systems as a first step. We got to do that well. And that's why we're currently offering people who are willing to invest in Originclear a very good equity package for Originclear, but also founding shares in Water on Demand Inc., because that is the current priority.
That's a fantastic deal. I had looked into that. I didn't even see the founding shares part for.
It's not publicized yet, and that's because it's not part of the formal offering. But we decided to go ahead and grant that to the investors currently. So you get a multiple of your investment in the shares, you get 200% warrants, you get the 25% of the net profits on your investment for those water systems, and you get a pro rata anti-dilutive share in the spinoff Water on Demand Inc. And let me tell you, when people hear about that, oh my gosh, sign me up. People are very excited about this because, look, they're pioneers, they're founders, right? They're part of a new thing. 1981 was when oil well master limited partnerships were created. That's where we are today for water. Water on Demand is 1981. The people who are contributing to this are the VIPs. We've raised, $3 million so far on this Water on Demand thing since November, and it's rolling well. And the founder shares in Water on Demand will be limited to 20 million, and that's it. After that, so all people have to do is go to originclear.com, click on the invest button. And if you're non-US, we rely on you to take care of your own accreditation, your own risk. And if you're US, we have to verify. That's how it works. And we invite your listeners to jump in. And there will be, I believe there'll be a crypto rollout, but that'll be done really in the crypto world, crypto style, because there's a special way these days to finance crypto rollouts, and that's what we're going to do.
Of course, like you are based in the States, you do have to worry about regulations and stuff, so it has to be that special crypto way. Riggs, I really appreciate your time. Are there any sort of like final thoughts you want to mention about Originclear or crypto? I know you've probably got a busy schedule ahead. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
No, it's been a real pleasure, Creon. And I would say this, that let's think about the long term. Let's not get excited about the day-to-day, about the noise that's happening and pandemics and conflicts and this and that and the supply chains. Just try to think in longer term, and let's try and build for what the world will be like in 5 or 10 years, because it's going to happen faster than we think. If we do plan well, then we'll be helping to build this new world. And I think it'll end up being this hybrid world of self-sustainability with a good modicum of government resources. And I think it'll stabilize out that way. And I think that'll be a better world in the future. So that's my feeling, is let's work for the long term.
Yeah, no, and that's like a perfect. I was going to ask you 2 questions, and you both summarized everything for the long term. Build it together, self-sustaining, have to do it that way. Rigg, thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. I really hope we can get you on in a few months' time, or like maybe once you guys start doing the crypto thing and then dive deep into that. But still, we still managed to bring a lot of points home when it comes to crypto, and I think a lot of our viewers and listeners will appreciate that. And so I'll be putting all of Originclear's social links in the notes. Please do check out that investment idea. It is pretty interesting. I've looked at it myself. Again, not financial advice from either of us, but something for you to think about. And then we will hopefully see you in a few months.
Kriyan, I look forward to it. Let's check out 6 months or so. I'd love to give you an update on where we are.
Definitely.